Although we are sharing this year's event virtually, the festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktahumguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Ntsinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuhavut. We recognize all First Peoples who are here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Hi and welcome. My name is Fawzia Mirza, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. And the panel is entitled Making the Jump, Canadian Television Directors Working Internationally. I'm so excited to be here moderating this panel. I myself am an actor, writer, transitioning to writer director. I have a short film in this year's program entitled Noor and Layla, which I had the chance to direct and write in Toronto in September of 2020, and it's screening at this year's festival. So I'm super excited to bring up each of our guests, and I'll try to give them as much of a welcome as they deserve, because everyone has done a lot. And so please know that what I'm sharing is only a small portion of the work that they've done in their lives. First of all, we have Gigi Saul Guerrero, who is born and raised in Mexico City, is a Mexican genre director, filmmaker, and actress living in Vancouver, Canada. She's described by Variety and Latitude Latinx as part of the new wave of Latino talent. Gigi graduated with honors at Capilano University's Bosa Center for Film and Animation, and is also a current directing instructor at Vancouver Film School. She's been praised as one of the top emerging directors in the horror genre by Empire, Dread Central, Fangoria, and Bloody Disgusting. Guerrero is co-founder of Lucha Gore Productions in Vancouver, Canada. She's directed an action-packed episode for The Purge Season 2, directed her feature debut Culture Shock for Blumhouse Productions, and is the winner of the Best Primetime Movie at Imogen Awards, which is still 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Her series with Warner Brothers, Stage 13, La Quinceañera, won the Audience Award at the 2017 Morbido Film Festival. And in front of the camera, she's posed for Playboy Mexico and many pinup holiday-themed pictures. And as an actress, she's most commonly known for her voiceover work, such as in Netflix Super Monsters as Vida and Marvel Superhero Adventures and Spider-Girl. Recently, Guerrero has also booked 2 leading roles in new anticipated animated series. Please welcome the amazing Gigi Saul Guerrero. Next up, we have Rachel Talalay. Rachel Talalay's eclectic career spans 3 decades of directing and producing. She recently completed the film A Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting for Netflix Family and worked with Greg Berlanti and Warner Brothers. She's directed 7 episodes of Doctor Who, Sherlock, and American TV, including American Gods, Marvel's Iron Fist, Doom Patrol, and Riverdale. In between TV episodes, she directed the film based on Stevie Cameron's award-winning novel On the Farm. She also executive produced an independent feature, An Introvert's Guide to High School, which premiered at the Whistler Film Festival. Other features include Tank Girl, Freddy's Dead, Ghost in the Machine, Wind in the Willows, and more than 75 hours of TV, from Ally McBeal to Without a Trace, Randall and Hopkirk, Deceased, to Touching Evil. Her varied producing history includes Hairspray, Crybaby, Nightmare on Elm Street Parts 3 and 4, and The Borrowers. Please welcome Rachel. Thank you so much for being here. And finally, but not least, is the incredible Sherry White. Sherry is a screenwriter and director based in Canada. She is currently directing and co-show running Pretty Hard Cases alongside co-creator Tassie Cameron for CBC and NBCU. Previously, she was showrunning and directing 2 seasons of Little Dog for CBC, for which she was nominated twice for a DGC for Best Comedy. Other TV directing and credits include Nurses, Burden of Truth, and My Perfect Landing. Besides writing, producing, and directing TV, Sherry wrote the award-winning feature Maudie, starring Ethan Hawke and Sally Hawkins, released by Mongrel and Sony Pictures Classics in 2017. She also wrote and directed Cracky, which screened at over 30 festivals worldwide, including TIFF and Torino Film Festival, where it took home the jury prize. Sherry has directed several award-winning short films that played at various festivals across the globe. She's represented by Harrison Artist Management in Canada and by CAA in the US. Welcome, Sherry. Thank you all so much for being here. So to get us started, I'd love to just ask each of you a question I'm sure you get asked a lot, but I think it really helps give us context for some folks who haven't heard the story before, and for folks who are just getting their start in the industry. And maybe, you could start us off, Sherry, like, how did you get your start in the business?
In the business, like right from the very beginning? Like,
I mean, I feel like the very beginning is often interesting because I know everyone takes a circuitous path, but maybe you could talk a little bit about some of those key moments that really impacted your breaking into the business, into your career.
well, I began as an actor in theater and then started writing for myself in Newfoundland, which is where I'm from. And so I started writing for myself and producing things, and then started writing. I think I wrote my first feature in 2001, and that was strictly to give myself a leading role. So, but then I found out that I preferred writing, and I slowly became, and I was better at it. So I did more of that, but I did. In the early days, I think I thought I wanted to write and direct, and I didn't know which more. So Cracky was a feature that I wrote that I did direct, and I did love doing that. But then the writing, I moved much more into television writing and producing. And it wasn't until I was executive producing 10 Days in the Valley, actually, with Tassie for ABC. And we had one of the directors that was on that had done like 300 hours of television. He had so much work under his belt and awards, and had been at it for so long. And his episode of television came in, of his episode. And I realized that he was directing it, because we were the producers. So we kind of had to take over the editing of it at a certain point. And I realized he didn't pay attention to the point of view of the story. He wasn't directing it. He was just directing it sort of objectively. And I realized at that point, the director really is the storyteller. And if he had just thought about whose point of view the story was in the episode, it didn't matter how much fancy shots he did or all that stuff, we would have had a better episode. And that's at that point when I realized I can direct, because I can tell stories. And there's lots I needed to learn, and I still need to learn. But at that point, that was sort of why I decided when I then was show running Little Dog, that I wanted to put myself forward as the pilot director, because I knew that I had enough gas behind me to do that. So that was sort of how I got my foot in the door for directing.
That's amazing. And just to reflect that it really was seeing someone not really understand the story you were trying to tell, even when you had given the story to this person. It's really hits home for me, and really embraces sort of my own personal journey of like why I feel like I think I should direct. Why am I waiting for someone else to do it? So thank you for sharing that. Rachel, could you talk a little? I mean, I just even preparing to speak to all of you, I was just reading about all the work you've done, Rachel, and I was like, holy shit, like this And
Yeah.
you
So how
know,
much time do we have for my history?
yeah. And I lived in Chicago a long time. So the John Waters connection speaks deeply to being in Chicago. So maybe you could share a little bit about that start and how the journey has
Yeah.
where it's taken you.
And I just want to nod to Sherry and just say, yes, this understanding of what a director actually is, which perfectly defined in the people who've done too much television work without any engagement in what they're doing. And so it's heartbreaking to hear that. And I mean, that's not what I believe directing is. So.
No,
but,
and just say he might have, I think after a while, people stop being hungry and they stop looking for what he can direct with his eyes closed, and frankly probably was at that point. So.
And I've seen years and years of while women were battling for opportunities, men having, getting, and basically I watched somebody walk in the room, a male director walk in the room and go, and walk out, meaning master 2 close-ups. And that was all he had to do. And, here's his US directing fee and his residuals and his, I very much respect that things have changed a lot now, and that you need to, there is so much more respect for the work in television. But backing up to where I started, which was in the 80s, and I really started in production, and I started as a production assistant. I volunteered as a production assistant on John Waters's Polyester, which takes you into how I met John Waters and grew up in Baltimore, and was quickly kind of moved through the production ranks, so that I was producing within the first 6 years of in the independent feature world. So the New Lines of the World, and there was a lot of low budget independent work and companies because of the video cassette industry. And a lot of what they were doing was horror because they couldn't afford to compete with the studios. So if you look at the very bottom of my resume where I was learning, and I was pushed toward production. So I didn't know that I had to be a director. I didn't know my place yet. I just wanted to learn it all. So I was an AD, and I was a second AD, and I was a production manager. And then I often say that because of in this independent world where we were all kind of working together and swapping jobs and learning everything there was to know about production. And I was fortunate that I hooked up with New Line immediately, because they were partial financiers of Polyester. And then they took me to New York, and I worked on one of their horror films there, and I got to know New Line. I was just fortunate that I fell into one of the independent company that survived from that time. And it survived because of Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, it's known as the house that Nightmare built. And I would say that everything I know about filmmaking, I learned from Nightmare on Elm Street, because I started as the assistant production manager and location manager. And then on the next one, I was the production manager. And on the next one, I said, I want to produce. And so by part 3, I was producing. And that's how, and I had done enough accounting that I understood, because I got sort of thrown into accounting because I had math background. I mean, which is just ludicrous, but I had math background. So we're going to put you in accounting. That's how I learned what every job was. So that's kind of, and then I produced Nightmare 3, produced Nightmare 4. Then they asked me to go and produce Hairspray. And I went to John Waters and said, hey, last time I was your PA, I don't know if I can come and be your producer. I don't know how people are going to feel about that. And he came back and said, no, people we know. And that relationship was so strong that he and I are still good friends. And that led me to do Cry Baby. And I was then came on staff at New Line, and then ended up saying I'd really like to direct when the part 6 came along. And then I broke into the rest of the world. But that's sort of my up and coming. And that kind of trajectory doesn't exist so much now, because it's easier to make your own film. It's so much cheaper. We can all make content with our phones and our I made Introvert's Guide to High School, the film I produced, with a first-time director for under $10,000.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's amazing.
And we premiered at Whistler. So
I mean, it's fascinating too, because even thinking about starting as a PA, it's such a great place to start and learn sets. But I feel like, that's not even the entry point for folks anymore. They're just sort of ready to be like, yeah, and I should just be running this thing, right? And it's like,
well, I think they thought, I mean, I think we thought that in some degree then too. There's always this, why do I have to go through any kind of training process? Anybody can, there's this feeling like anybody can direct until you do it. And then you realize that there's so much depth of what you need to know and understand to do it well.
so true. I honestly, I'm glad we're having this conversation in public, but also on this platform, but also I'm like, gosh, I wish we could just like hang out and talk about this. I am learning and absorbing so much of that as I step forward into directing. I'm like, I stand a lot. There's a lot of standing, and you have to have an answer for everything, even if doesn't matter, blue or green, just pick a color. It just a decision needs to be made. So hearing all of this and really taking it in. Gigi, could you talk a little bit about your path in and what that was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally happy that I went to film school here in Vancouver. Best decision ever. The movie that made me go to film school was Children of Men. I think I was like 16 years old. And I was like, Mom, Dad, I'm going to film school. Like, it just was that movie that just changed my life. And I did a whole degree program. So I was in school for 5 years, for a long time. And because that school was a university, my very last year of film school, I was just taking academic courses like English, physics, and all these horrible things that filmmakers are not good at, So I was doing those classes. However, I really took advantage of the fact that I was still a student and I had access to everything at the school. I still had access to our studio, our cameras, our computers. So I really took initiative with my close friends that now we have our own company, Luchagore Productions. We were just making short films all the time. At this point, I think I have about 18 short films under my belt. And we were just creating content like no tomorrow. It's exactly what we were just bringing up. It really is easy to make stuff. We were making so many viral short films. By the time I graduated, we had a really good knack at like, okay, how do we make something for $100, for $50? Like, what's trending? What's the hashtag of the month? And we were making content for that. And our stuff was going viral a lot. One of the most viral videos that I did for like $50 was at that time, the charcoal masks were really in and people were ripping them off and doing funny YouTube videos. And I said, what would happen if I did that, but my skin actually comes off and we have all this thing? And that thing like exploded. Like people were like, Gigi, are you okay? And like all this stuff. I had family from Cancun being like, did you sue them? Like thinking that my face actually came off. It was awesome. So yeah, long story short, it all started with just making short films. Bam, bam, bam. I was working as an extra starting out. I was working as a carny at Playland. I was the trainer at the haunted houses, but on the weekend I was a filmmaker. So it was a lot of no sleep, a lot of my parents free cooking, a lot of favors, just to make short films. But we were always building and building and building our brand. So what got me started was building Luchagore, building that team that has cool content. And what really started it all was we became the first filmmakers for Eli Roth's Crypt TV. And Crypt TV is a very big channel now for horror fans with short form content. So yeah, I was one of the first filmmakers to film for them, became really good friends with Eli. And he he really helped me out with pitching. So, you know, my first big pitch was my feature debut for Blumhouse, Culture Shock. And I have him to thank really for helping me out on how to really have that pitch. So, you know, for some people it takes one short film, for some it took 15, you know, that's fine. But it's a really good time right now too. I think the right time, right place was a thing, because I did leave Vancouver to go follow my dreams. I was finding here in Vancouver, I was staying at the same level. Short films. No agents were wanting me, and the quality of the shorts were good. You know, it was hard. And as an actor, I mean, as a Latina actor in Vancouver, you can only get so far. So, you know, the day calls, voiceover, it was all good. But I was like, man, like that opportunity is really not coming for directing. So I left. I went to LA, called up Eli. I was like, hey, man, can I stay at your pool house? You know, can I stay there and just learn what it's like to pitch? And got my reps to help me out. And Blumhouse was my first meeting, and I booked that feature. So now, you know, the rest has really worked out nice. Yeah, I haven't been around that long. You know, I hope to get to these lovely ladies level that, you know, you work on so many great things. So I'm just inspired how fast things are happening now.
Well, I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, it definitely is inspiring though to hear you talk about it, about making shorts and the importance of making them. And I say that as
Yeah,
somebody who makes short films, and sometimes people do not find them to have value. And
couldn't
so
agree
hearing
more.
you, yeah, talk about just like keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it.
You have to. And you know, even last year during the pandemic, you know, we went ahead and we made another short film, and people were like, Gigi, you just made a movie for Hulu and directed TV for The Purge. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, listen, we're making content no matter what. So I called up Crypt TV after so many years of not working together. I was like, hey guys, want to make a short film? And we just did. And we just went ahead last year. You know, so you just gotta keep making stuff, keep telling stories.
It's
So
really
I think
amazing.
it's what
Yeah.
keeps us going.
Well, and it's amazing to also hear, you know, I mean, the topic of the panel is, you know, the Canadian directors and artists and creators working in that international space, whether that's American or abroad. And so you really present the natural segue into, you
Yeah.
know, how that happens, and really fascinating to hear how you did it. I mean, could you talk a little bit more about that? Like it
Sure.
was just like you were like, I'm at a plateau in Vancouver.
I really am. You know, I think also I find in my experience, and maybe not for others, I find also genre still has yet to get, you know, the Canadian funding excited. I also like to mix my culture in the genre. I like to bring the Latino twist. It's not really Canadian subject or
Mhm.
topic. So, you know, I had a lot of trouble having Telefilm want to fund me. I had a lot of trouble getting a rep here. I had, you know, everybody was like, your stuff's really good. Um, do you have any Canadian content? I got asked that many times, many times. And so I just felt I was staying in the same level. And luckily, Luchagor, the production company, the team that I have here in Vancouver, we were just excited to just make stuff. And the only people hiring us was Playland, making their commercials, you know, for Halloween. And, you know, it felt so strange to me that I wasn't sure if it was my background, the Latino background in my stories, or if it was just that it was genre. But I was starting to hear more and more that genre is really tough here. It wasn't just me. So it
Mhm.
was a tough decision to leave Luchagor behind for the year, you know, and go pursue it. Because my reps in the States were like, you know, Gigi, you have to be here.
Yeah.
Because Zoom didn't exist 4 years
Right.
ago. You know, this
Right.
was not a thing, right? So
Yeah.
it really was, you got to be here or good luck where you are. So it was a risk, but it was worth it.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Sherry, could you talk a little bit about your experience in Canada versus other spaces and what that transition was like for you?
I mean, most of I have gone down to work as a writer and producer. I've worked on some projects and I'm always pitching and selling development as a writer, but I haven't gone down there as a director. So the projects that I've been directing on are Canadian projects that are acquisitions down there, or in the case of Pretty Hard Cases, that we were partnered with BCU, and then they sold it to IMDb TV. And so I haven't, as a director, gone down there yet, and nor do I think I would as a director. That's because it's more of a secondary thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But
Meaning for you, your focus is writing primarily, and
yeah, really my focus is storytelling, and I really love that. And I think it's really important I think it is important for us to take turns doing, putting on the different hats a little bit, to just, because for me, understanding directing makes me a better writer. I think, the fact that I have a background in acting makes me a better writer. I think we're all, even for actors, I think they're very much an integral part of the storytelling, and they don't get enough respect and credit for that in some way, but they're very much storyteller. So, but primarily, I would say my number one is the writer.
do you feel as though when you're writing now, having directed, you're giving different kinds of cues for how you see the story for the director, whoever that'll be?
I think more so that I'm understanding and it happens all the time, even when, because I've been direct, like, again, I'm a showrunner on the show that I'm still in production with, and I can't remember the name, Pretty Hard Cases. But I directed on that. So I the minute that I'm the director prepping, I see things differently. I'm like, okay, but do we need these details? Because now we're going to have to have inserts. We're going to have that, so you see it in a way that, whereas I think a lot of times as the writer, you just see the world. It's not, you don't see shots, or for me, I just see the world everywhere. And I don't think about we have to tell that from this person's point of view. I think it's one of the things, and Rachel or Gigi, I don't know if you notice this in directing other people's stuff, but how often people will write different points of view in a scene.
Yeah.
And how complicated that is from the director's point of view, because you've got to tell, I got to tell it from this person's point of view. And then we suddenly are in this person's point of view. So then seeing it from her point of view so it's almost like it's 3 or 4 scenes, and the writer thinks it's a scene. And that is really complicated. And if you don't tell it right, you can't tell it the way that they've written it. But I don't think that the writer understands that often. And even I say that, I even make that mistake myself sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, I definitely think I do that, and struggle with that.
Yeah, I think it happens all the time. Like, you will say, you'll have a writer, a character will say something to another character, and then suddenly she's looking over there at a guy, it's all those things require, well, you have to shoot that guy from her point of view. And then it's very complicated, and you write it so simply. It can be this, 3 lines.
And it's worse when it's 3 lines, because then you're like, oh, it's 3 lines. You've got, therefore you should be able to finish it in 10 minutes.
That's right. The AD is looking at that as like this tiny little scene or something.
And there's 50 people looking at each other and things that need to happen. And so to me, it's music to my ears to hear the showrunner who understands production as well and understands directing as well, because that's exactly it. I was just talking to somebody about what a nightmare Christmas party scene I had on The Flash, where everybody is in a very small, very poorly designed set, and there's no flow. It's just everybody has their little story, And it's 20 scenes in 4 pages
Right.
that,
Oh, wow.
and actually the problem is that there's no point of view.
Right.
It's just, there isn't actually a point of view. That's what makes it impossible. And yet when you work with a writer who understands that every scene needs a point of view, yeah, and as a director, if I can't figure out how to direct a scene, it's usually, sometimes it's because I don't understand the scene and I need to just talk to the showrunner, but it's usually because the scene doesn't have a point of view. And so I
So true.
can't find my way in, and my way in is often visual, and it's always storytelling. It's, first and foremost. So I'm with you. It's what's the core and what are we trying to tell the audience? But yeah, if it's just all these random little interactions with no point of view in this Christmas moment. So
Yeah.
each of them was important because each of them was their own little emotional bit between different people. But it just was, to me, it was the worst nightmare to shoot.
Right, exactly, because that's, as a writer or a director, as soon as you know the point of view, then you can give it shape and flow and it can build towards something. But without it, it's like, what is it?
Right, because essentially we're talking about, like, if we're seeing these couples or people in little groups at a party, are we seeing it from far away? Are we like looking
Yeah.
at what's on their plate from up here? Are we
Who are we
seeing
following, right?
a ring get pocketed, from a distance or up close? Like, who's right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
I'm about to go leave this panel and rewrite and revise all the scenes in all my.
Good.
I know. I mean, honestly, like, one of the things that I find really amazing to talk to folks who are directors and writers and multi-hyphenates is like looking at scenes and seeing how can we make these better? How can we, use maybe more visual cues or point of view to strengthen a scene. So maybe that's something we can do for another panel in the future, which would be super awesome. But kind of coming back to you, Rachel, to get to the question that Sherry and Gigi answered. I mean, and just really hearing, and just to share my own experience, I'm someone who was born in Canada. My family moved to the US, but I'm kind of coming back to Canada now and working in Canadian space. So, and finding the challenges of each country to be what they are. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that journey has been like for you in Canada and internationally.
Because I'm the interloper here in terms of I started in America, so we don't have to ask the question of like, how did I get an American agent? Well, I started and I directed Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was #1 at the box office for 3 weeks in a row. So I never had trouble getting an agent, and that is like unheard of. That your first film is a success, and then it got hard. It was hard learning everything, but I went in on a successful franchise and made a very successful chapter of it. So I thought, it was made. And then the gender issue became very serious because all the male directors up until then had been given Joel Silver in major films after that. And suddenly it was like, well, we didn't like yours that much. So I thought, oh my God, it did much better at the box office than the one before, but I've done something wrong. I haven't, and I had sort of followed. This is a long story that we won't get into, but the bigger deal being, well, Joel Silver's not interested in you because you're a woman, and that leads to a long to how. But I think what the audience wants to know about more is sort of where Gigi is talking about, where like you hit this. Because I don't really count because I had this incredible first opportunity, but where you hit this wall where you can't get to the next level, and what do you do, and how do you get an agent, and how do you and especially if you're seen as small and Canadian, and I see it here in Vancouver's more of a
Purpose.
So Vancouver exists much more to, all the Berlanti shows are here. We have lots of production here, and yet a lot of the local Canadians find it harder to get on those productions because there's some stigma, and I think the Directors Guild is working incredibly hard to beat that stigma. But where are you when you're with Gigi and you've got this amazing work, but you can't get to that next, you can't get that opportunity? And that has been changing since the change happened 2014, 15, where, and a lot of people say it was Me Too, but it wasn't really. It was the ACLU and the EEOC suing the studios, saying there's a huge problem with women directors. I mean, you know, there's a huge problem when the population is 50% and the women directors is 4%. So that change has really started to give opportunities to women and POCs, and that is improving. And so I feel like coming in as a diverse person, and I don't really feel like a diverse person, but in the film business, being a woman is a diverse person. That change has now finally started creating real opportunities that weren't there for the whole, what I call the dark ages, which is anything from 1996 to 2014, where the population of women directors was. So now, I mean, just to help sort of talk to the audience about, now the question is, okay, you've made a couple of shorts, how do you do the Gigi thing? And the volume of work that she did and the connections and all those things is incredible, and still struggling. I mean, and
I just finished my second feature. I'm unemployed.
Yeah.
You know, like, you gotta keep fighting. Comes out next week, and I'm like, hey guys, so what's the next job? Oh, okay, no job yet. All right, you know, like
nothing is easy.
You gotta keep working.
Yeah, so. I mean, it's not easy for me. I can't get a pilot. I mean, I've been offered pilots, but I can't. Not in a way that has ever worked in a way that made sense. So I can't. I shouldn't really say I can't get a pilot, but I, by all rights, should have done a ton of pilots at this point.
Right.
And I'm always number 2.
Right.
So, and I don't want to be unfair, because I definitely been offered pilots, but never in the situation that I feel like I wanted.
Yeah,
I still struggle. Yeah, and I still struggle, and I still think, why aren't they calling me? So,
it's interesting to talk about the thing about making all the shorts, because I wonder how much, Gigi, that you would have done that, like the fact that you got traction, that they did go viral, even if it's not a lot of money that you're getting from it right away, but that is an encouragement to keep going, right?
Of course. Of course.
So I think it's like, I think it's advice that I think some people might take that advice and then really do it, but for some people, they can't just keep pouring their own money into these shorts and keep making them if they're not getting traction.
No, it's true. And listen, like we were entering, you know, local competitions here in Vancouver. We were entering online competitions. We were always coming in. I like to say we were always winning second place. we were always in like the top 5s, and you know what, from there, what we would really do, we kept being friends with the winners every time. We would always kind of join them a little bit, and people that have won first place have continued to work with me as the visual effects artist or as the makeup. The people always that won in many of these things just kept joining us, to the point where when we did win, and I'm talking like small prizes here, but one time when we won $1,000 for the first place, we didn't share that with the crew. We put it towards the next short. So we were always, you know, adding our winnings, I guess, to each short film, but we were never overly ambitious to shoot something that would make us so poor. So it was just like, what location you got for free? What actor friends are available? Let's ride around that. Right? So it was always that kind of momentum, because you're right, like how much of your own money should you and will you spend?
Right.
Right.
Or you can't keep going back to like it again. I know one of the things in say Newfoundland is it's a smaller community, and it's like
Yeah.
you can't keep asking everybody to do things for free and then want them to pay you to make something. So it's just it can get harder
It
to
can.
do it,
Yeah.
right?
We all
There's a
get
lot of people I
ghettoized.
owe beer.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
And we do get ghettoized to a degree. And so, I mean, I've been tremendously fortunate. I mean, and in addition to not being ghettoized because I've done comedy and I've done drama. And yet, from Gigi's standpoint, I would say it's an incredibly good thing that she has focused on horror and is fully, you have very specific genre, very specific situation has been very good for you. So whereas if you're just too eclectic, although I can't explain why I ended up doing Hairspray and then Nightmare on Elm Street in the same year. I mean,
I love that.
Yeah, that's the
combo.
same genre, Rachel. That's
you can imagine
Well-
my parents' house, my very academic parents' house, with in one corner is a Hairspray poster and the other corner is a Nightmare on Elm Street poster, and then all their academic stuff, and then the plumber comes in and is like, "What?"
This doesn't make sense.
Well,
But I think
what's-
where I was actually going to go between what Sherry and Gigi saying was this business of community, this business of who do you know, and being able to use your connections, or and taking opportunities. And Gigi talking about being a visual effects artist or a makeup artist or other things you can do, taking every opportunity you can. If you don't fall into the writing turning into the partnership that Sherry and then the success that Sherry has geniusly found.
But I think you're right, and I was going to say that when Gigi was talking too, is it really, and because it really is about the connections that you make and submitting to competitions and festivals and stuff like that. It's like those are getting people to read your stuff. It is getting
exactly
the connection.
like competitions and film festivals really was where I met everybody. I don't come from a family that is at all involved in film. Nobody.
Yeah.
So it really, for me, my community began in film school, and for some it begins online, right?
Yeah.
So you have to continue to network wherever you can. It's a lot about that, for sure.
Yeah.
Making those connections.
And what I'm hearing from everyone is really talking about like how much hustle is perpetually happening
Yeah.
at all levels. And, I used to hear people say this, that like, it's, you just got to stay in it long enough to see the success. And I feel like that's something that I really relate to, in terms of you start to just know enough people, or the people who were your friends when you were PAing are now executives, or the person who was the assistant in the room is now running the studio, and you two had a really great connection, or it's all of those relationships over time that really are part of the infrastructure of success. It's not always just one moment in time. And recognizing how difficult it has been historically for women, and even now continues to be. I feel like I often hear this even now, where whether it's agents or people still want to put you in a box, even multi-hyphenates. They're still like, yeah, but focus. What's your one thing you do? Be one thing. How do you sort of, each of you, push back when the industry wants you to be like one thing?
Oh man, I go through this all the time. Because well, for me, listen too, I actually had a conversation. One of my reps last year, around just before pandemic, was very nervous that I like to also model, and that I'm very comfortable in my skin, my sexuality. I do like to do pinup. I do like to do all these things. And they were telling me, Gigi, you have to pick, and you shouldn't act in commercials, because there was this Swiffer commercial all over the place that people have seen me in a Colgate one that were out. And so my face was on other things than just the movie and the horror shorts and all that I was doing. That actually became a conversation that I had to pick. and that I should start switching my Instagram to look more professional. And I said, no, because then I'm not being myself. And it's one of those things we have to continue to encourage to break borders. Because I was like, what, a director doesn't wear mascara? Come on, like, what are you talking about? Like, things like that were still today, like when I show up on set as the leader, people are like, who's this little girl here? It still happens, but you have to stay strong in who you believe you are and who you are proud of being. And that's what I've been following this whole time. It's who I am is who I like to be and represent out there. It'll still be a thing, I'm sure, for a few, I hope not too long, but it's one of those things that I've learned very quickly that you have to be very strong about.
It'll be a thing, but it'll be a thing that will start to work for you, I think.
I think so.
I agree.
I agree. But it really surprises me every time it happens. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah.
Again, has to be a conversation. But yeah, I've even had the conversation of choose one.
I love that. I love
no.
that was included in your bio, that you were in Playboy pinup or whatever. I just think it's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Agree. I think the audience sees fake.
Yeah.
They sniff all that, so the fact that you're staying yourself is fabulous.
You have to, right? I mean, I can tell you, my parents are very happy that I voice cartoons, because they're like, this is the only stuff we'll watch. So
that sounds like my parents. Yeah.
Mine were not sure when I started. We're not sure when I started working with John Waters. So
yeah.
Yeah, that would be a tough
at that point before Hairspray. Polyester was his first R-rated film, so they were quite nervous when I. And then, it's grown to absolutely love it, but.
Well, I mean, honestly, like I'm really sorry that that's happened to you and recently. And I think, thank you for sharing that, because it's really important for folks to know that we're not in some sort of a post, sexism world. I mean, this is happening on the reg daily to people in this industry. And it's sometimes more coded than other times. And I think it's important that we're vigilant about it, and that we do have these supportive spaces where we can talk about it, call it out, and know that it's happening. So thank you for sharing and being vulnerable.
And I just want to say,
Carrie, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, the truth is, sometimes as women, we do play different roles, and sometimes we do want to shed some of those roles. And the fact that you don't, Gigi, is amazing. And I love that. It makes you confident. But if we're a woman and we do want to shed one of those roles, that's okay too. Because I remember one of the first things, pieces of advice that I got years ago at the Women in the Director's Chair, and I've told this story before, but it was one of the other women that were in the Women in the Director's Chair. I came back from a meeting where I was talking to my art director about what I wanted to do, but I led with, I don't know what I want. And I left the meeting in tears. And because I did know what I wanted, but I was a little bit uncertain. So I wanted to soft pedal it. But she gave me this piece of advice where she said, I don't take this the wrong way, but maybe you don't want to go to those meetings with your hair in pigtails. And for me, that was good advice, because unlike Gigi, I could fall into a little girl where I would lose my power. I would fall into that little girl kind of behavior, and I wouldn't have the power or the strength I wouldn't be the boss in the room. And so for me, I did have to kind of remember to switch out of that role and be a tougher, stronger person. And so the fact that I don't want other women to think that you should not lose a side of yourself. If it's a side of you that doesn't empower you, you can sort of leave that outside of the room,
I
Well, and
love
I
that.
think that really speaks to, I'm not going to remember the reference, but there is, whether it was an article or someone talking about like power poses, and they really are generative in terms of how we can kind of find and channel our own power in rooms. And I think some of it comes from executive boardroom kind of space, but it is crossing your legs a certain way, or, and so there
Ah,
is a lot of truth in how we can tap into that kind of energy, especially when, and I deeply relate to that. I'm like, I have this voice and this voice, and it's like when I'm directing, when I'm at home with my wife, it's like I can have whatever voice I want, but when I'm on directing on set, it's like I have to make a quick decision and I have to speak like this. That's it. There's no other voice, and I can't
yeah.
take an hour to decide which Thai place we're going to order from.
Right.
It's
Right. Yeah.
well, yeah, so definitely hear that. We only have a little bit of time left, so I'd love to hear, well, first of all, I'd love to hear a lot more from all of you, but given the fact that there's a mixed audience watching this, likely there's some folks who are new to the industry, in the industry, people looking for inspiration. Is there a piece of advice, and I know we've heard some of that, but is there a piece of advice that you have that maybe you'd wish you'd gotten sooner, or that really impacted you, or that allowed you to kind of focus your energy in a way that made sense for your career, that you'd like to share with the folks that are watching?
I mean, I'll go first. I would definitely say my best advice is to just never, in this business anyways, is to never be afraid of failure. uh, Finish what you started and learn from those mistakes. I can tell you guys that, again, I come from film school, and 80% of my colleagues stopped after the first short film, and they got discouraged and scared. Uh, so I always say, don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of it, and learn from it. Because that really is how you elevate in this business. Because it's a tough one, let me tell you. Like,
Yeah.
you really got to build that skin. I'm still learning how to have thick skin every day, but if you're not afraid of failure, you will keep making stuff. That's the one I'd like to give.
Yes, that's so beautiful. Rachel, I saw you do the hand, right?
Do the
Yeah.
hand. Yes, even now I still raise a hand. I have two. One is a very practical one, and one is a more inspirational one. The practical one is spend time in the editing room, so you really understand storytelling in that final, that's where the final version of everything you've done comes together. And I think a lot of television directors don't get an opportunity to spend any time in the editing room, and they don't understand levels of storytelling and what you can and can't do. And you don't learn anything about your directing until you've had to be responsible for your mistakes. That's what Gigi inspired me to say. And then and so I think that part of storytelling is so important. And then the other, so that's my practical advice. And then the other more inspirational advice is persevere. And just persevere.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Also, I have definitely had to deal with my mistakes in the edit room, and was like, why didn't I think about the other side of this shot? Great. And let's close off with you, Sherry, with wisdom and thoughts that you'd like to share for folks.
Well, I think that for me, one of the things that have kept me on track and kept me feeling that there's been good, steady progress is I set goals for myself. And I set the goals to help prioritize. Like, for example, at a certain point, I said, I am not going to I'm going to make my living as a writer. And I wrote things I got paid for. And if that was $1,000 that I got paid, then it was in the bank of I'm going to work on that. If I threw out ideas and I wasn't getting any money for it, I put them on the back burner. And I just wrote things I was getting paid for. And eventually because that was my goal. If that's not your ultimate goal, and you want to write something that's your own sort of, you want to make your flea bag, and that's your absolute goal, then that's your goal. But you might not, making money might not be your goal right away. So I think goals always keep me on track. And I can track them back from when I was 25, and it's always been really helpful.
I feel like that's a fantastic note to end on. And just to echo, goal making is not just productive, but super sexy. It's super helpful in the industry. And my goal is to share space with each of you again. Thank you for your time and your wisdom and your art and what you brought to this panel today, but also what you're bringing to the industry in multiple countries. So thank you, Gigi, Rachel, and Sherry.
Thank
And
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the St. John's International Women's Film Festival for having us all here today.